Story 1. Most cultural issues are deliberately manufactured to obscure class issues and sow division. How much do you want to bet that a significant cultural event will occur during Luigi Mangioni's trial? Story 2. A group of technology billionaires is implementing a plan to replace American democracy with a techno-futurist, quasi-feudalist state powered by deep surveillance and artificial intelligence agents. They have already seized the White House and multiple national communication channels. Story 3. Michael Jordan was secretly suspended and allowed to play baseball as a way to distract from his gambling habits during the 1990s when people were concerned about such matters. David Stern manipulated the draft to secure Patrick Ewing for New York, and similar situations are occurring this year with Dallas and San Antonio. I just realized that all the conspiracy theories I believe are related to the National Basketball Association. Story 4. I believe that at least one celebrity faked their death to escape the spotlight and live a normal life. Story 5. A sentient fungus arrived on Earth 30 years ago and has now managed to seize control of most world governments. Story 6. Big banks prevented a total stock market and economic collapse in late January 2021 and have never resolved the underlying issue. They merely concealed the problem through financial instruments, with data on these instruments unavailable to individual investors since February 2021. Story 7. Who wants to be a millionaire? The 50-50 lifeline was rigged. We all know it was never randomly selected. Story 8. The Hall of Presidents at Disney World featured a Hillary Clinton animatronic, which was designed to portray her as if she were going to win the election. Later, it was converted into a Donald Trump animatronic. Story 9. Epstein was killed for knowing too much about important people and having compromising photos of them with children. The United States government allowed the September 11th attacks to happen so they had justification for attacking the Middle East and infringing on the rights of American citizens. Additionally, the United States government allowed the attack on Pearl Harbor to occur so they could gain support from anti-Jewish and pro-German citizens for joining the Allies in World War II. Story 10. I believe the Trump shooting was staged to create an image of him that contrasts with his false persona. He seeks to portray himself as both a revolutionary and a victim of a corrupt system. The truth is that he embodies that system of oppression, while we are its victims. Story 11. The Americans intentionally lost the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. They realized that regime change does not work. Instead, it destabilizes the region, causing a chain reaction. That is exactly what happened. I do not believe this is a conspiracy. It feels like a personal understanding to me. Story 12. The rubber duckies on the dashboards of Jeeps were not an organic trend but were planned by the industry to sell more duckies. Ernie may be involved as well due to song royalties. The world is run by big tub toys. Story 13. I believe it is very plausible that Hitler escaped Germany before the war ended and lived the rest of his life in South America. Story 14. I find that many conspiracies contain a small amount of truth. They are not complete truths but partial truths. Story 15. Well, it's not exactly a conspiracy theory, but I believe the United States secretly supported Saddam Hussein in the 1990s and staged the entire Kuwait War in 1990 to distance itself from Saddam's crimes, which it had assisted him with for a decade, especially against the Shia Arab majority and the Kurdish minority. My thoughts are supported by Ambassador April Glaspie's meeting with Saddam, where she gave him a green light. The fact that Saddam was a hardcore ally of the United States, a proponent of women's rights, and anti-communist further strengthens my belief. I think the whole war was staged so the United States could distance itself from Saddam and assert itself in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Additionally, the United States mostly bombed Shia and Kurdish areas while leaving Saddam's support base in the Sunni Triangle unharmed, and the bombings always seemed to coincide with Kurdish or Shia revolts. Moreover, Saddam and his family lived in absolute luxury without fearing a U.S. assassination, enjoying the latest American brands and movies. It's also notable that the Central Intelligence Agency more than once betrayed people who were against Saddam and returned them to him, like his son-in-law, whom the United States helped smuggle into Jordan, only for him to be brutally murdered alongside his brother upon returning home. Story 16. Dennis Rodman works for the State Department as an undercover operative negotiating on behalf of the United States with North Korea in an unofficial capacity. Story 17. Big automotive companies promoted four-wheel drive and all-wheel drive vehicles to circumvent emission standards that required inspections in a dynamometer setting. This setup is impractical for multi-axle drive vehicles at mechanics or state testing facilities. Story 18. I still appreciate the theory that NASA initially observed the ocean before shifting its focus to space. What did they discover down there that frightened them? Story 19. I heard on a podcast that iPhone keyboards now make it easy for us to make typos and accidentally hit the microphone button, leading us to use speech-to-text more, as well as potentially listening to our conversations. That might be true. Story 20. Every time Elon Musk announces a test tube baby with a wealthy woman, it coincides with another step closer to human cloning. Story 21. We just had our last presidential election in the United States in 2024. The extent of the overt overreach has become clear, with the playbook from Project 2025 visible for everyone to see. They do not even try to hide it anymore. There will be some emergency or special circumstance that will require the United States to suspend the election in 2028, but by that time, they will have lowered the bar so much that people will react as they are now, with initial outrage followed by inaction. Story 22. The United States government helped to perpetrate the attacks on September 11, 2001. Princess Diana's death was not an accident. Jeffrey Epstein did not kill himself. Story 23. The countdown number in the corner of advertisements on YouTube does not reflect actual seconds. Some of the numbers may pause to extend the ad duration. Story 24. There is massive coordination happening across all major media, including the Associated Press, to feed people narratives about issues regardless of the truth. Some of this came to light with COVID, highlighting how strongly they reported and denounced anyone who dared to suggest that COVID didn't spread through surfaces, that cloth masks weren't effective, and that people could still spread COVID even after being vaccinated. To be clear, this isn't a case of, 5 years later we found out we were wrong. There was solid science at the time that was being ignored, and actual scientists were attacked for pointing these things out. If it happened with COVID, it's happening with other issues as well. Story 25. Not sure I believe it, but there are interviews that have been largely removed that could support this theory. Nice guy Chris Benoit murdered his volatile wife after he found his child dead, and she was responsible. Then he took his own life. Medical reports indicated that he had severe chronic traumatic encephalopathy, but if we are all accepting Stone Cold's diagnosis, that isn't an issue. Story 26. Not a conspiracy theory, but who actually runs the world? Who are the higher-ups? I know it isn't God. Story 27. Medications that aren't safe are approved because the individuals testing and approving them receive incentives for their approval. Story 28. These comments are disappointing. I will provide some insightful ones. Disney's Frozen was created to reduce awareness of Walt Disney's controversial cryogenically frozen body. This is a manipulation of search terms to keep people from learning about the hidden truth of Disney. I believe that certain entities monitor conspiracy forums and intentionally promote increasingly outrageous ideas to discredit theories that may have some basis in reality. Every forum has its extreme viewpoints, and these seem to be suspiciously prevalent. Story 29. I suspect that Bush allowed the September 11th attacks to happen so he could invade Iraq and Afghanistan, possibly even being involved himself. There is no proof for any of this, but Bush's behavior after the attacks raises many questions. We know he was at least warned about a significant terrorist attack and did nothing to stop it. If he was complicit, then bin Laden may have been responsible as well, potentially working for George Bush. This would explain the evidence against bin Laden, such as his admissions of guilt. It might also clarify why Bush allowed bin Laden to escape from Tora Bora, why he wasn't captured until Obama took office, why bin Laden's family members were flown out of the United States shortly after September 11th, and why a video of him was conveniently released before the 2004 election. I do not like to entertain conspiracy theories, but I find many aspects of Bush's actions surrounding September 11th suspicious, and I wouldn't dismiss the possibility of an insider job given the problematic actions of his administration. I also believe that, in the long run, the economic elite may be planning to use artificial intelligence as a means of replacing the entire working class with obedient robotic workers. Story 30. The person who coined the term conspiracy theory did not understand what the word theory means. It is a hypothesis, not a theory. Story 31. Shocked to not see any unidentified flying object content here yet. If you haven't been following, let me bring you up to speed. What we know, evidence from the Nimitz encounter shows us definitively that unidentified flying objects exist. These flying crafts far surpass our aeronautical capabilities and seem to baffle naval pilots and other credible witnesses. What I believe, the United States government, along with others such as France, Russia, and the United Kingdom, has known about these crafts since the 1940s. There are research programs that have recovered crashed crafts and biological organisms. They haven't made this public knowledge because they actually know very little despite over 50 years of research. This phenomenon fundamentally changes our understanding of physics and is almost impossible to research effectively. Story 32. Brian Mulroney spoke with several influential party members and persuaded them not to run for party leadership in 1992 to ensure that a woman would be elected as leader. According to the conspiracy theory, he believed that if the party lost the election under a female leader, it would be easier for people to blame her and not the party. This way, when she stepped down, a man could take over, and the party could make a comeback. Story 33. That Frozen, the movie, was advertised so extensively that if you looked up Disney Frozen, you would find information about the movie rather than anything about Walt Disney supposedly being cryogenically frozen. Story 34. The government directs severe weather towards states with Republican leadership, potentially using advanced technology. Story 35. All these space failures are starting to raise doubts about the moon landing, even though keeping such a significant secret would be nearly impossible. Story 36. I am uncertain about any conspiracy theories surrounding this, but something seems suspicious about Trump being shot at during a campaign appearance. A few days later, the incident was so completely overlooked that most people reading this may be thinking, I can't believe someone actually shot at Trump. I totally forgot that was a real event that occurred. Story 37. Oil and automotive companies are focused on maintaining their control over the American public to protect their profit margins. They advocate for zoning laws that prevent the development of dense, walkable communities. If more people walked, car usage would decrease, leading to lower resource consumption. This isolation can contribute to healthcare issues and an unhealthy population. People may avoid walking because they have been conditioned to see it as burdensome or associated with poverty. By keeping individuals isolated in their cars, they are less likely to engage with their communities and may perceive those around them as adversaries rather than neighbors. Story 38. The Liz Truss Day collar theory. Once you realize former Prime Minister Liz Truss has a humiliation kink, all the utterly foolish things she said and did make more sense. Story 39. They have a cure for cancer, but they will never give it to the public because chemotherapy and other treatments generate millions each year. Story 40. At some point, people will have to use cards to make purchases. However, when you use your bank card, it will display your entire purchase history, account balance, profile picture, criminal records, and any other relevant information. It will determine whether you can make purchases and reveal your social status. This card will be linked to everything in your life. Story 41. I believe that movies are created to desensitize the general public to events we will experience in our lifetime. I believe that the calendar is merely a social construct and that no one truly understands time. Russia smuggled the components of a nuclear bomb and housed them in the embassy in Washington, D.C. Story 42. COVID-19 originated from a Chinese laboratory and was accidentally released. A significant portion of the conspiracy theory surrounding it involves Chinese troll farms attempting to downplay the situation to avoid blame being directed at China. Russia capitalized on this to create further chaos. Story 43. We never landed on the moon. The events of September 11th were an inside job. We have been covering up the existence of aliens. The Pizzagate conspiracy is real. Story 44. I don't really believe in conspiracy theories, but I do think there are issues that are overlooked or not fully explained. I wonder if some government actions are kept secret. It's always good to ask questions, but I prefer to rely on what can be substantiated. Story 45. My personal conspiracy theory is that the flat Earth idea was created to discredit real conspiracies. I have no proof of this, but it makes sense to convince conspiracy-minded individuals to believe something that is known to be false and associate it with the truths. The claim that all world leaders are friends with Jeffrey Epstein and that they fly on the Lolita Express to engage in illegal activities is hard to believe. When someone adds that the flight isn't long because the Earth is flat, it makes it clear that the argument lacks credibility. Story 46. The National Basketball Association rigged the draft lottery in 1985 so that the New York Knicks would receive the first pick, Patrick Ewing. Story 47. The 2001 anthrax attacks were an attempt by a small group of right-wing individuals to create a connection between the September 11th attacks and Iraq. Additionally, I believe the Oklahoma City bombing had more conspirators who were not investigated, as it would have exposed unsavory ties between radical right groups and military intelligence agencies. Story 48. Aliens are real for sure. Aside from the evidence, it receives too much attention for it to be fake. It outnumbers every other conspiracy in terms of witnesses. However, that is pretty much insignificant. Consciousness exists beyond the physical body and dwells in an unobservable dimension. Aliens might be able to utilize other dimensions for various reasons. Future human beings might, too. If time travel and multidimensional travel exist, who cares if there are plain old aliens obviously living on other planets? There are an infinite number of solar systems, and we are expected to believe that we are the only ones or that we are so unique that if there were others, they would desire to meet us as much as we do them. What if there is so much life that we are actually uninteresting to the more advanced beings? Story 49. Chemtrails, when there are a lot of trails in the sky, seem to influence people's moods. I noticed that on days with many trails, people become more aggressive, while on days without them, it feels more calming to be outside. Story 50. Pharmaceutical companies have influenced politicians and educators to promote gender-altering and depression medication, convincing individuals that they will be happier as another gender, which then requires extensive medication. What does a drug dealer want? They want you to need drugs. Story 51. The wealthy and influential actively conspire to prevent you from becoming a Christian and seeking the truth, as this would hinder your financial support for their extravagant lifestyles. They desire for you to engage in immorality alongside them, as this is how they maintain their power. They present this to you in subtle ways. The film Eyes Wide Shut was based on a true story. There was no other reason for the director to create a film set in a real-life context. They want you to believe you are ignoring the reality of what happens behind the scenes with certain individuals. Story 52. Fast food is human flesh. KFC basically admitted it with their commercial. NASA lies. We are in a dream and are essentially the brain cells of the dreamer. Antidepressants aren't meant to really help you, just numb you. They might be good for anxiety, I guess. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.